Hey gang, quick viewer request type video. Someone asked what's the difference between like a native 5 and an American Lawman. So I thought I'd just bring this up here and show you next to each other, and you probably see the difference initially is quite striking. However, there are a lot of similarities here too. In both of the lines, both Spyderco and Cold Steel, I would sort of put these two knives as kind of like the not particularly exciting knives, but are really, really good for carrying and actually using. So you're not going to have like super flicky, awesome fun like Axis locks will provide. It's certainly not a flipper knife like you might find with, say, your Kaiser Gemini or anything like that. But they've got good materials. They're basic enough for anyone to really be able to use them, and they're both made of pretty cheap materials in one sense, but then they've gone all out with pretty decent steels in another. So let's have a bit of a talk about them. So the primary differences, we'll go into these first, and for these I'll bring out the scale, and that should be the bearer of all the news you need to know. So the native is 68 grams and the American Lawman is 118 grams, so a fair bit heavier, almost twice as heavy, the American Lawman, than the native 5. However, the American Lawman is the bigger knife for sure, as you can see here, closed from tip to toe. It's about 2/3 of an inch longer than the native 5, and then when you open them up, you've got, again, probably about another full inch of length. You find the blade in this American Lawman is about 3.25 of cutting edge. The native is just on, I think it's actually just under 3 of cutting edge there. So, and the handle of the Lawman is a little bit longer as well. So the size and the weight are what gets you the differences between these two knives. In terms of thickness, they're both about the same thickness. The native might actually be a little bit stockier. But the FRN is such a lightweight material, especially when considering that Cold Steel has a bit more of a intensive lock structure here as well. Now both of these are essentially plastic handled linerless knives. So G10 is a type of like modern day super resin plastic type stuff, and this is just more or less standard fiberglass reinforced plastic, bright orange here. And then they've both got really decent steels for the blades. So this native particular here is S90V, whereas all the American Lawmans now are CTS XHP. You can still find some of the AOS 8 ones around, but they have been discontinued in terms of production. So the steels, are very high-end steels, 242 cuts, I believe, 278 cuts, this is just in my testing, until they no longer slice paper. And then, you've got basic plasticky sort of materials. Locking mechanisms, very similar. They're both more or less lockbacks, with the Cold Steel being a triad style lockback, which has an extra pin here that sandwiches the blade tang between and the lock tang between each other. So it makes a bit of an extra pillar of strength there, you could say. But really, in terms of practically using them, both of them lockbacks. The native just requires a little bit less pressure to push that one in than the Cold Steel, which requires a bit of a deeper thrust until it finally becomes free. So there we are. Those are the similarities. The differences are that the native 5 comes in a range of steels and therefore range of prices. So I'll put the prices of both and all of the current options up on the screen for the native lightweight range and the American Lawman range. American Lawmans all sit at about the same price, Australian and American, whereas natives, depending on which steel you'll get, you'll pay more. So you'll see that a basic native in S35VN, which I would argue to be a slightly inferior steel to XHP, is about $10 cheaper. However, for a small bit extra, you can go up to a S90V blade, S110V blade, and then for probably an extra 25% price increase, you can get a Maximet blade on your native. So very, very capable cutting steel there. However, on a smaller blade, so less blade, regardless of which native you get. So in terms of comfort in hands, they've both got similar styles of handle there as well. As you can see, you've got very sort of generic shaping here, just for whatever fingers are left over from the next two choils to sit on. So you've got a forward finger choil, which you may or may not choose to use. So that is if you're not using it. That is if you're using it. I would generally find myself using it. This feels like you're a little bit too far back from the cutting edge. Some people like choils for this reason, and other people dislike choils because they want to hold the knives like this and it starts to feel a little bit like a dialing wand. But I'm quite happy with a choil. So very similar design philosophies there as well. Very much both just very basic utility knives, very well made. They've spent the money where, in my opinion, it matters, and they've got reasonably, comfortable handles that are made of, standard plastics. No need for titaniums or anything that you start to look at when you try to make a knife a bit more premium. So the bigger brother of, I would say, the Native is the Stretch, perhaps, or even the Endura. The bigger brother of the Lawman is the Recon 1, which is an extra ½ inch longer. The Stretch above the Native will end up being about the same size as the Lawman and about the same weight. And then the Endura is a little bit longer again. And then if you really want something huge, you can get the Police. This also comes in a G10 Plus liners model, which I wouldn't compare to this one because this one still doesn't have liners. It's got G10, yes, but no liners. G10 Natives have liners and are a substantially different feeling, more robust knife. This knife here doesn't even have washers. It is very, very basic. Smoothness isn't particularly an issue. You can still snap it open. However, it's not the sort of knife that you get to play with and flick around. The American Lawman does have bronze phosphor washers, so it is a slightly smoother knife. However, then in terms of unlocking it, you need to press in a little bit more, which can be a little bit of a learning curve. In terms of faults of each knife, well, I'm not the biggest fan of either of the clips. I would put the Natives at slightly better than the American Lawmans. The Natives is, whilst it protrudes a little bit more, it goes over the pocket just a little easier. The Cold Steels is a little shallow there with its ramping, whereas the Natives kind of feels like it grabs onto the pocket a bit easier. The Cold Steel has this area here, which I never do like, which is a bit of a pocket lint catcher, as well as sometimes a key catcher when you pull it up. And the Native is very, very, I'd say, a fair bit more expensive, given that you get less materials. Until you start matching the steel here with perhaps this S90V, I guess is probably a match for the CTS XHP in terms of edge retention. You're paying a little bit more for a little less knife. Although, on the plus side, it's made in America, whereas this one is, like most cold steel knives, pocket knives, made in Taiwan. So that is a bit of a side-by-side. Which one do I prefer? I think I prefer the American Lawman still. It's just a little bit more robust and substantial, and for very much a by-the-numbers working knife that you don't particularly get joy from playing with, you just get joy from using. The American Lawman is almost peerless, in my opinion, as your most basic working knife. Another one you could perhaps look at is the Mannix-Lightweight, which has the bolt action style lock. A little bit more fun to play with, and comes in again a very wide range of exotic steels once more. But this is the answer to the question, Native versus American Lawman. I prefer the Lawman just a little bit, but the Native is a great platform steel for basic utility and also hosting excellent various steels that Spyderco is experimenting with year by year. Go all the way to my computer and I forgot to talk about the grind of the blades. So a full flat grind and a sort of mild hollow grind here on the American Lawman. Both feel to me like they perform about as well for EDC tasks. The hollow grind is actually a little bit better, I find, on stickier foods. This will probably be a tomato cutter a little bit better, but then when you're using it against things like cheese, I do cut a fair bit of cheese with my pocket knife. The hollow grind has this shoulder that tends to sort of split the cheese rather than this, which the full flat tends to stick just all the way through to the cheese, almost binding up and requiring a little bit more downward friction. So that is the thing. I don't really have a preference here. I generally prefer a flat grind for all my EDC tasks, but the hollow grind certainly does have its merits still. And the general blade shape's fairly similar. You've got a bit of straight and a bit of belly on each. A little bit of a swedge on the Native. A little bit extra thickness, at least. Because it is a longer blade, you get an elongated thickness from the American Lawman. Probably a slightly stronger tip, although the swedging on the Native by no means makes for a weak tip either. So just a couple little things I forgot to mention first time around. Alright dudes, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.